I work in the mountains, and this is the scariest thing that has happened in my long career. A few years ago, I was working on the border between Osaka and Nara. I was thinning a forest on one of the mountains. That basically means reducing the density of the trees to improve the quality and growth of the remaining trees. Well, this mountain forest wasn't very well maintained. Weeds and vines had wrapped around the trees. I needed to use a chainsaw to chop them down. It was when I was using a chainsaw I heard a sound which sounded like someone's voice. Sometimes when you're using heavy machinery like chainsaws, you can hear sounds similar to human voices. Well, I can at least. The machinery can imitate voices when it's cutting, I guess. Usually I don't pay these anomaly sounds much mind, but I felt as if someone was stood behind me. I looked behind me, and there was no one there. I couldn't shake that uncomfortable feeling. I was looking over my shoulder all day. When the work was done, I changed out of my clothes by the side of the road, and then an old guy I work with came over and struck up a conversation with me. "I noticed you stopped the chainsaw a few times today. Is there something up with it?" "Nah, I just thought that, there was someone behind me a couple of times. It was pretty weird, but I didn't see anyone there," I replied. "That's odd. I felt like someone was watching me too," he said. I wondered if there was something out there in the mountains watching us, since my coworker felt eyes on him too, but nothing really happened after that. I headed down the mountain and into my hotel. Ate dinner and slept well. The next day, I had just finished work and I was driving down the mountain back to the hotel. I was working in a different area of the forest that day. When I drove past the point I was working the day before, I noticed that there were a few cars parked there. One of the cars was a police car. I slowed down as I approached. I wanted to see what had happened. A police officer noticed this and came over to my window with his palm raised, indicating for me to stop. At this point, I had forgotten about what had happened the day before. I was more concerned if I was going to be in trouble. But as soon as the police officer began to talk to me, I remembered with a shudder. I was asked for my contact details by the officer. I asked why, and I was shocked to my core when he told me that a body had been discovered in the area. I passed on my information and told him where I was staying, but I really didn't have any information for him. Sometime later, I was watching the news, and a middle-aged man had been arrested for the murder of a student. The body was discovered buried in the mountains. I read about it further in the newspaper when I got to my hometown. The man murdered the woman, put her remains in a suitcase, and then took the bullet train, then rented a car and drove to the mountains to bury her and the evidence. I was deeply shocked when I heard about this crime. 2 weeks before her body was discovered, we started working on that mountain. I then recalled something trivial and began to grow concerned. A car was parked in front of the gate which led to the mountain, and this prevented our truck from entering the forest to do our work. This was a one-way road which went deep into the dark forest. Next to that car, I saw a middle-aged man who was stood there looking anxious, staring into space. You know that 1,000-yard stare? Yeah, that. It was a pain since we needed to pass through that gate to get on with our work that day. My colleague hopped out of our work van and spoke to that man and told him to move his car. I remember that my coworker was speaking to him for some time, and when he got back into our truck, he looked perplexed. I asked him what he spoke to the man about. It went something like this. "Can't I drive down there?" the man asked. "No, it's actually off limits today because we're doing some forestry work. No public access permitted. Sorry," my friend replied. I have to take something very important into these woods today. If I don't drive, can I at least walk through here?" the man asked. "We don't mind giving you a lift if it's something important. How about that?" my friend asked to dissuade him. "I promised I'd do it alone," he replied. My friend didn't really understand him. "Are you meeting someone out here?" "We'll have to ask them to leave when we see them," he said. The man looked at the floor and shook his head. My friend had had enough. The man got back into his car and slightly moved it out of the way for us to pass. My friend then made a big show of shutting and locking the gate behind us. I watched him in the rear mirror. The man went around to the back of his car and opened his trunk and produced a huge suitcase. He seemed to struggle with the weight of it. When we turned around a curve in the road, I lost sight of him. That's all I saw. I don't know if that was the guy, but it seems like if it wasn't, it was a hell of a coincidence. I still hold out hope that he's just some innocent man who was meeting someone in the woods for a hike or something. The only thing that makes me certain that he was the murderer is because he said, "I promised I'd do it alone." Sometimes I find stories like this and they just don't sit right with me, so with a little digging, I think I have found some information on the real case. With the right search words and the help of commenters on the original story, I was able to find an article relating to the time and date of the original poster's story. Seems as if the mountain he was working on was called Mount Kongo, which stands between Nara and Osaka. I will put a link to the article, but unfortunately, it's like one of those 404 things, but I found another link, so it's basically a copy and paste of what was originally on that. So you can see it in the original text if you want, but I've translated it, and it goes like this. Female remains were discovered buried on Mount Kongo, and police have identified them to belonging to 20-year-old college student Chisato Yonemura. A 49-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder and was sent to the Kumamoto District Prosecution Office. The suspect is 49-year-old Hideki Kanedo, a part-time employee in Osaka City. The 20-year-old student had been missing since the 26th of the previous month and was discovered dead in the mountains of Gosei City, Nara Prefecture. According to our sources, Mr. Kanedo and Miss Yonemura met online several years ago, and some of Miss Yonemura's friends said that they had had arguments of late. Later, Kanedo was arrested and charged for her murder. After, he confessed and admitted in police custody that he had carried the body in a large suitcase on the train and rented a car to get to her burial site. Since Miss Yonemura weighed 40 kilograms, 88 pounds, and was 150 centimeters, 5'1", the police believed that his claims could be truthful. I have tried to find a photo of the victim or some other evidence, but I've come up a bit dry. Now, this isn't exactly uncommon because I had a lot of difficulty in my true crime stories finding pictures of Yoshifumi Kurita. I did find one thing weird. An image of the killer. I believe that it might not be 100%. In fact, I'm leaning towards it's not him. But nonetheless, I think this is a really creepy image to end on. Right? I had a bad experience the last time I went hiking in the mountains. It happened a long time ago, back when I used to love climbing mountains. I would prefer to stay anon, since my name is attached to a few hiking societies. And I don't know if some of my friends would laugh at me for this. I remember that it rained on the way down the mountain, and I didn't bring any rain-resistant clothing with me. It was a classic mistake. I found a little spot beneath an outcropped bit of cliff, which offered some shelter, so I stopped there and thought I'd wait until the rain passed. It would be way too dangerous to climb down from the height I was at. It was really coming down, which would make it difficult to climb back to the base. I thought it wouldn't keep raining like this for too long, an hour at max. But contrary to my expectations, the rain continued, and a fog bank rolled in. I'll be spending the night here at this rate, I thought to myself. The sun had already set at this point, and the night was approaching. I could see nothing but mountains and trees ahead of me. I didn't like to be stuck out here at night, so ill-prepared. I sat on my fold-out chair, turned my radio on, and had a snack. I looked up and noticed that someone passed by. It was about 10 o'clock at night at this point. "Hey, the path down is really dangerous," I called out. She nodded, slightly, and stopped. She looked to be about 20 years old. It was weird that she was out here wandering around so late. I tried to speak to her, and this is how the conversation went, to the best of my recollection. "Do you even have a torch?" No response. "It's too dangerous to try and climb down right now, you know?" No response. "We should wait until the rain stops, or until it gets brighter at least." She nodded her head slightly. It wasn't as if she came out here in high heels or something. She looked more prepared than I was. What I'm getting at is, she wasn't a damsel in distress. I guessed that she knew what she was doing. Since the conversation wasn't flowing, I looked her up and down, and then asked, "Are you here alone?" She shook her head to indicate no. "Well, where are the others then?" I asked. "There was a landslide, up there." Finally an answer. "Was anyone up there hurt?" I asked. This was beginning to worry me now. Even though I wasn't drunk, it was as if I was suddenly sober. I can't explain that feeling in any other way. That was all I ever got out of her. She reverted back to silence after that. She left soon after, despite my protests. I didn't actually see her leave. I don't know, that part is kind of a blur in my mind. At first light, I headed back down the mountain, safe in the knowledge that the rain had subsided some hours ago. On my way down, I noticed a helicopter flying overhead, and then I passed by a search and rescue officer. I made it down the mountain, and I was absolutely starving, so I headed into the restaurant at the base. The customers in the restaurant were discussing what happened. The same thing that young woman told me. The landslide. "Oh, that's terrible. I don't know if anyone made it back. Do you know?" The news was on in the restaurant. After a moment or two, the newscaster spoke of the landslide. Turns out there was a university hike on the mountain, and the landslide got them all. The newscaster reported that there was no survivors. When the photos of the victims passed by on the screen, my heart froze in my chest, for one of the women in the photo was the very woman I had that one-way conversation with. I haven't been able to go back to the mountains since. This happened recently, and I don't really have an explanation for this. I find it pretty mysterious. I love to go hiking in the mountains, and in the woods. This happened on a day in mid-August during the Obon festival in Gifu Prefecture. I was heading to Nagano, which is the neighboring prefecture to Gifu, to stay overnight, but I guess I got lost along the way. If you look at the map, you'll see the area between the two prefectures is deep in the mountains. I needed to pull over and check the map properly, but since I was on a mountain road, in the woods, I wanted to pick the right spot. I looked at the Maps app on my phone, and it turned out I was on the right road the whole time, so I used the opportunity to take a break from driving and have a drink. I realized that the place I parked in was pretty amazing looking. It had a nice view, lots of scenery. I looked around and noticed something. I parked my car on the shoulder of the mountain road. I was opposite a cedar forest. It looked like one that had been man-made. You know, like the trees seemed as if they had been intentionally planted in patterns. It was probably a great place to take a walk. Deeper into the forest I could make out a man-made structure. I thought that it could be a shrine, We get lots of shrines in Japan, and personally I find them pretty interesting, so I decided to get out and stretch my legs and take a look at it. I often did this on long drives. Even though I said it was a mountain, it wasn't a particularly steep one. It took me no time to get to the shrine in the forest. Forests are easier to walk through than rocky mountain passes, is what I'm trying to say here. I came to a small clearing in the forest, and as I approached the area the shrine was, I thought, whoa, this isn't maintained too often. Looks a little too small to be called a shrine too. It was practically dilapidated. No one else was around, so I decided to reach into my rucksack and grab a camera to take a photo. As I was doing this, I had the sudden impulse to look straight ahead. I looked up and I saw something weird. There were loads of cedar trees around, but ahead, a few tens of meters away, I could see something hiding behind a tree. It was white. All of a sudden, it was as if I couldn't move, like sleep paralysis had struck me. I couldn't avert my gaze. I was just staring at this white thing hiding behind a tree. It couldn't always conceal itself. I could see something white, like cloth, fluttering at the base of the tree trunk. This state of paralysis lasted for about 20 seconds, and then I was able to move. As soon as I was freed from the binds of that strange state of sleep paralysis, I felt my whole body shudder with chills, the like of which I have never experienced. I threw my rucksack back over my back, and I ran as fast as I could, back in the direction of my car. Something was terribly wrong out there in those woods. The sun was setting now. I wondered if I had been there longer than 20 seconds. I just couldn't remember it. It was very disturbing. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, which meant that I tripped over debris on the forest floor occasionally. My intuition was screaming at me to get out of there as quickly as possible, and stop for nothing. I had this sinking feeling in my gut, which told me, don't look behind you, no matter what. I clattered into my car and fumbled for my keys. I then got in and sped away. I needed to change direction, and while I was maneuvering my car, I felt like I saw that white shadow being once again. I started to panic, and I struggled to control my car, but I got away. I couldn't see any other cars in the area that day, on the nearby roads. I only noticed trucks when I got onto the main road. I gave up on my trip that night, and I just headed home. I couldn't shake that weird feeling that something was watching me, or was potentially after me. That's all I can say about that day. I have thought about it since though, and I have considered that I might have been hallucinating because all I could make out was a white shadow which fluttered. It was so weird. My interest in going into the mountains or the woods has diminished somewhat, but I had to go back and investigate that shrine or try to make sense of what happened. It was weighing too heavily on my mind. The problem is, there are a whole bunch of these abandoned, dilapidated, shrine-looking buildings in that area, and I cannot identify which one I approached. I went fishing with my friend just outside of Tokyo, by an area close to the Shiromaru Dam. It's a little tricky to get to the fishing spot, or even find it. It's really a spot only the locals know about. We arrived at night, and the plan was to fish until the sun rose. We were going to catch as much as possible. But once we set up all the gear, I didn't much feel like going hell for leather all night. I just wanted to relax. So I set up my rod with a bite alarm, and I just chatted with my friend. I got a bite. I raced to my feet and snatched up the rod, expecting a battle with a big fish. I was surprised to feel no pull. Was the line entwined in the weeds, or did a fish get lucky and make off with my bait? I wondered as I began to reel the line in. It felt like something very delicate was on the line, or was attached to it. It didn't seem like it was in the weeds. I reeled in the line for another 30 centimeters or so, and I got the shock of my life. There was a large amount of human hair attached to the line. I looked over at my friend who was watching me, and his face was frozen in a silent scream. I instinctively threw the rod to the ground. I didn't want to lose my expensive fishing rod, and it was being pulled into the water, so I just cut the line and watched it disappear into the murky deep. It was still long before dawn, and my friend and I didn't feel like fishing anymore with that down there. We decided to get the hell out of there. On the way home, we were discussing what had happened with the rod in the car, and before we knew it, we were sharing scary stories that we heard of or we read. This actually helped to get rid of some of the tension in the car that we shared. We were now thinking of the hair on the rod as a story rather than something disturbing. I mean, of course, I was still going to go home and report it, but I couldn't really do anything until we got home. We were still out in the woods. I was telling a scary story I had heard, which I thought was a really good one, and when I got to the punchline or the payoff, I was surprised because my friend didn't react, and he hadn't said a word. "Hey, I'm driving here and you're sleeping. At least you can do is listen to my story, man. I'm tired too." I was mad at him, so I looked over at him, and I was annoyed to see that he was still awake. But then I looked at his face, and his face was really pale. He was staring out of the passenger window. "What the hell is up with you, man? You're freaking me out." "Is this a prank?" I asked. "There's a woman out there. She's standing on the side of the road," he replied. We were still surrounded by the woods either side of the dark roads. "What's she doing out here this time of night? Where is she?" I asked. "She's always there, no matter where we go, man. She's just standing by the side of the road watching us," he mumbled. "What are you talking about?" "At first I thought I was crazy, but I've seen her 7 times now," he said. I still held out hope that he was pranking me, so I kept an eye on his side of the road. My spine froze when I saw a woman stood by the road up ahead. The car was fast approaching her, and just as my friend said, she was stood there, staring at us. I looked at my friend and he just silently nodded at me. We drove for miles in silence back to town, and I saw her again and again. I don't know how many times, maybe 20. I dropped my friend back at his house. I watched him in the rearview mirror, and he looked really nervous and timid. I got back to my house, dumped the fishing gear inside, and locked the doors as fast as I could. I went upstairs, and I was too scared to take a shower. I just got into bed. When I got downstairs in the morning, I saw my mum, and she was looking concerned. "Can you explain what the hell that is in your cooler?" she asked in a stern voice. "I didn't catch anything, I don't think. I don't know. Why?" I said. "You brought back something weird. Go see for yourself. You better deal with that, because I'm not touching it." I walked over to the cooler and saw the fishing line I had cut. That dirty line, entwined with that jet black hair. That line that I thought sank was staring at me in my home. I have no idea how it got there, and I'm almost certain my friend didn't prank me. It's a mystery. It scared the hell out of me.